I'm a faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I work in a particular part of the university there with doctoral students who are learning to become turnaround specialists in education. And that's one of my roles. And then I have a small little business with Bob Keegan called Minds at Work, and we are founders of that organization. And that's really where the Immunity to Change work is housed, and where we do our teaching other people how to do the process, and doing some direct service ourselves so we can keep ourselves in an active learning mode around when it works, how to help it along, and that kind of thing.
So, in a way, we could say that it's a developmental model, it's a usable developmental model, but it's also still always developing?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Okay. I love that one of the first things that you said is that you and Bob stay in doing active service in order to keep developing. And
yes.
That, in all of the interviews I've done of presenters, that keeps coming through as so crucial, to keep doing your own work, keep doing your own practice. Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this and how the Immunity to Change model developed from your perspective?
Sure. So many years ago, I got very compelled by Bob's constructive developmental theory, and it helped me to make sense of dimensions in my life that before then were deeply stressful and puzzling. And so I really just ate the whole theory up. It was wonderful. And then I got to a point where I was like, this is terrific. There is theory, and there's research that the subject-object interview helped us to know people in fact do develop. So it wasn't just a theory. But then there was the big question is there anything that we can do that will support people's development? Is there anything we can do that might accelerate it? And the Immunity to Change process was born out of that question, trying to turn theory into something that could be very practical. And I would say that is my real interest in all of this, is the practice dimension.
Okay, well, going the other way, just to get it for our members.
Yeah.
Is there a way to put a somewhat concise definition around the theory?
Okay, I'll give it a go.
That's a tough one.
I'll give it a go. So constructive developmental theory, each of those two words is pretty central to understanding the essence of the theory. Constructive meaning people construct how they make sense of the world. There's nothing out there independent of our own processing and making sense of something. A lot of people believe in the phenomena of constructivism, but what this theory does that adds a very important overlay to that is to suggest that there are regularly occurring and developing ways of making sense of things. So they're not just random ways we construct meaning, they tend to coalesce around a central something that we are subject to, a set of lenses that tends to, at a given point in our development, tell us how to be looking out into the world. And that's the thing that begins to change over time until we become subject to a whole next way of understanding how the world works. And with each developmental, I'm going out like this with my hands, because with each developmental wave, we become able to really understand more deeply greater and greater complexity.
Yeah, as you were talking, I got a visual of starting with a smaller pattern and then having that pattern expand.
That's
so
right.
the center doesn't dissipate, but you keep adding.
That's exactly right. So that what first seemed to you, that's the only thing there is, now becomes an object on a bigger set of, oh, there's a whole other way I can look at that particular piece, because you get to see the bigger surrounds, and then that itself becomes relativized, and you get to even see that itself was seen on a bigger canvas.
Okay, so it would seem to me to be quite a complex leap to get from there to the process, the Immunity to Change process.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So the core of what develops in these different worldviews is the thing that we are subject to, we begin to be able to take as object. So in a very kind of crude way, the thing that we are seeing through becomes the lens that we can take off and we can examine it. And as soon as you can take it as object, that allows you to not be fused with it. That is the central thing that develops. So what the immunity to change exercise does is it's a very kind of clever way of helping people see what it is that they are subject to, because the questions themselves ask people to do in a surprising way, a kind of unearthing of the thing that is hidden. And once they see the thing that is hidden, they are in a position where they can start asking questions about it.
Yeah. Okay. It really helps. I've read some of the material, I've heard it, I love the definition. Take it off, look at it, examine it, put it back on, and then you look through something different because of the information you've gained.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Can you give us a couple of examples about, we have a lot of members who are newer coaches and starting their practices. They tend to be people who have a good solid basis in something else, business people who've come into it, a lot of health care workers, a lot of wellness coaches. How could they begin to bring your immunity to change process, if they learn it, into their practice?
Yeah. So I think it's worth saying that this particular process is probably best used when you're working with a client who has tried to make progress on a particular health goal or whatever their goal is, and they don't seem to be making enough traction, or they don't seem to be making enough progress, or when they make the progress, they can't really hold on to it. So it's using people's frustration around not being able to accomplish something that's very important to them as part of the motivator for, I can help you see that there's a different way of going about your change that will help you be more successful. And so one of the things I would recommend to coaches is to begin to make a distinction between certain kinds of things we coach for and other kinds of changes we coach for. And I'm going to draw here on the distinction that Heifetz and Linsky make between technical challenges and adaptive challenges. And it is quite possible in our coaching we want to help people develop technical capacity. And for most of us, that's like helping people to be able to develop like a muscle or a skill that is very information-based, very practice-based. And for many people, once you start practicing that, you do get good at it. There's nothing getting in the way between the skill you're trying to learn and you're learning it. And that's more of a technical thing. When we get to these adaptive challenges, what makes them adaptive is that there is something inside of each of us that we're going to actually have to work on in order for that skill to become something we can metabolize. And that has a lot to do with some inner way that we are protecting ourselves from feeling like, well, for example, inadequate, that I can't learn the thing. So that's a thing I think is often worth our always understanding, which is when a client can't make progress or is having trouble making progress in accomplishing a goal, it's likely because there is something going on that's hidden that is making it more challenging for them to really do this kind of internalizing and metabolizing what on the outset should look like, oh, that could be a pretty straightforward thing to learn, but it's not.
So it would be it's a really nice description, the really common experience that coaches have of a client who has enormous desire to make a change, but just can't seem to get by.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I like the idea that giving them the opening to be able to conquer something or to be able to understand something is probably better language. Is a motivator.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Yes,
really
and
important.
I think that's one of the first steps that the process, the 4-column immunity to change process, helps people to see, because in that first column you identify the goal. The person almost always is very attached, connected to, they know what their goal is, they've been trying to make headway on it. And then the second column in the exercise asks people to name the things they are doing that work against their column 1 goal. And a lot of people are very aware of that too, and they often beat themselves up for exactly those behaviors. I know I shouldn't be, fill in the blank. If your goal is to lose weight, I know I shouldn't be eating all of that stuff. I know I should be exercising, those kinds of things. And at that point of the exercise, helping people to see that our default model, which comes out of more of a technical understanding of the problem we're trying to solve, is to just go at the change by trying to alter those behaviors we just named. And what the model very quickly helps people to see is, as long as you go at your behavior change by attacking behaviors, and you don't get to the deeper mindset issues that are giving rise to the behaviors, you are setting yourself up to never succeed. And to me, that is one of the greatest gifts of the immunity to change process, is helping people be kinder to themselves and see that, no, it is not because they are weak or because they are bad people that they're not succeeding. It's because they are using they're applying a wrong model, an inadequate model for understanding what is the problem they need to really solve in order to make progress on their column 1 goal.
It's fabulous. It's one of the only systems that I've ever seen or heard or begun to understand that really gets at that self-criticism that is such an enormous impediment to so many of our clients.
It is. It is. And I think this is the thing that gives me the greatest pleasure in even just doing the map part with somebody, where they get to see the quote-unquote picture of themselves with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. They see their immune system is that it helps release a lot of that, not only the self-criticism, but then there's that whole next layer of the self-criticism about being so self-critical.
Exactly.
And it just keeps going. And just to be able to say, I get it. I get for the first time why I have been so frustrated.
Can you talk, it's incredibly powerful, I can feel it as you talk about it. Can you talk about the next steps? Because that's really where your change comes in.
Yes, that is exactly right. So the first step is just doing what we call the diagnostic piece, which is seeing that picture of yourself. One foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. That's my immune system. And then to identify what are some of the big assumptions I hold that keep that immune system in place. And those big assumptions are an important part of the diagnostic, so to speak, because they name what is something that we are unwittingly applying as a set of kind of beliefs and interpretations that happen in 2 seconds. They're the principles in the back of our heads that lead us to have to protect ourselves the way we do in our immune system.
And it's all running in the background and you're not aware of it.
Exactly, right. So not only are our self-protective mechanisms nothing we're really aware of, but the thing that generates the self-protection we are also not aware of. So once we have an understanding, even just naming what these big assumptions are, we've now gotten like the tool, the lever that we can use in order to begin to explore, can we open up our immune system? So what we do is identify one of or two of the big assumptions we're holding that we believe most get in the way of our protecting ourselves. So if I use myself as an example, many years ago, and this was really when I felt like this model is really powerful, as I took on the goal of wanting to be more comfortable talking in large groups. And there was like, if I could see everybody's face, I was always okay. But as soon as I couldn't see people, I was like, got very anxious, and I had a lot of chatter going on in my head. And so I took on as a goal, which was a big goal for me at the time. It was, it meant a lot to me to kind of get to a different place, because I was spending a lot of time being just not present, basically. So when I figured out what some of my big assumptions were, they were basically things that amounted to, I assume I can't be myself in order to be an effective speaker, that I need to be funny, I need to be a storyteller. I'm not funny, I'm not a storyteller, and I was assuming I could not draw on my own voice and feel comfortable in that and be a compelling speaker to people. Well, that was a lot for me to begin to first name and then explore. Could I actually let myself feel comfortable just being myself? It meant I had to start thinking about how would I actually begin to talk to a larger group of people than, say, the people who in my own mind I thought, well, they're fabulous and I can't do that. And then I began to explore and create for myself ways that I felt more comfortable. And the more I felt comfortable, the more it helped me challenge that I couldn't, that assumption that I couldn't be myself. And I began to see, oh, this is not an inconsistent phenomena. I can be myself and I can also be effective. So it became an exploration that definitely took a lot of time, definitely took a lot of courage, but I knew what I was really working on, which was developing much more clarity about my comfort level, myself in my own skin, and how could I be present to myself in order to be present for other people.
So it's a great example, and what I just heard, I think, is that you started with a motivation of something that was observable, that you knew you wanted, and that you knew you couldn't, or you thought you couldn't achieve.
And I had tried. I had tried.
Sure. And what the process, as you describe it, did was give you continuing bits of motivation to continue forward in what is a very difficult exploration. I think one of the things that happens sometimes with these systems is that people get discouraged because they don't see progress along the way of the hard work.
Right.
Is it true that this model sort of gives them that?
Yes, but in a very unexpected way, because for most of us, I think we ask ourselves, am I making progress on my goal? Am I getting better at speaking? But what my journey was about, and I think this is true for all the immunity to change work, is it's the journey of trying to be more aware of, am I getting better at exploring my own sense of who I am in my example and how I can be comfortable being myself. If I can overturn that big assumption that I have to be somebody else, I can't be myself, and be a compelling speaker, that's really where the work is. If I start exploring that, it will ultimately lead me to being able to be the better speaker. But the real work isn't first and foremost about being the better speaker. So I think, I don't know, would another example be?
It would be great.
Concrete? Okay, because I think for many people, the weight loss goal is a very familiar one. I actually often ask people when I'm speaking in a very large group, how many of you have ever tried to lose weight? And it is remarkable, that 95% of the people's hands goes up in the air. Next question, how many of you have actually lost weight when you've gone on that diet? About 93% of the people raised their hand. And then I asked the question, how many of you then regained that weight? And everybody raises their hand, right? So why is that? Because that's a very good example of a goal. People know how to go at it behaviorally, and they do, and they lose the weight. But obviously that isn't the point of a diet. The point is you want to maintain the weight loss. So why are people regaining the weight? So from our perspective, that has to do with their conceiving the problem only as this behavioral one and not getting to these deeper mindset issues that are what are leading them to do the overeating or to not do the exercising. And if you don't get to that stuff, no matter how many times you kind of reduce your calories, that will explain the yo-yo, because you've not actually addressed the stuff that's behind the scenes. So people have a whole different set. I mean, it depends on who you are, but just to give you an example, the kinds of things that come up. So like a mindset thing could be, I don't want to be beholden to anybody else telling me what to do. And my assumption is if I follow a diet, I'm following what somebody else is telling me what to do. That's turned out to be a common mental model, that it was like me against somebody else. Or for somebody else, the idea that if I lost weight, I would actually be more visible to people. And they'd want to get closer to me. and their assumption was, there's a lot of different assumptions people could have there, but I'm not worthy of being close to, or I don't know what will happen to me if you get close and whether I will in fact be able to get close to you. Or for somebody else, it's about, I don't want to be seen as a sexual person. I mean, just the mindset stuff behind weight loss is a very, very rich area, and if you don't get to that,
then you're doomed to failure.
Right.
It's really true.
Right.
So what's the next step after this? What's the fourth step? We dig it out.
We dig it out.
Make it visible. Make it understand it.
Yes.
And
then we begin to start developing a much more active relationship to our big assumption. So if my assumption is that I will feel deprived if I don't eat everything that I want, I'm now going to start paying attention to myself when I am engaged in my everyday behavior. I'm not even going to try to change anything yet. And so I'm going to start watching myself and feeling my inners when I'm engaged in my eating, for example. And I'm not changing anything. Do I feel deprived? No, I don't feel deprived. I feel like, actually, now I'm starting to realize I ate so much, I actually feel like gross. Or I'm liking it. Whatever you discover, what is happening in the process as you're just paying more attention is it's not so automatic anymore.
So you're not throwing yourself at something, you're just observing.
Just observing. That's exactly right. And in the process, what you're also doing is beginning to develop the muscles that help you be more tuned into what is actually going on inside of you. So it doesn't just become this whole behaviorally oriented phenomena. Which isn't to say you don't want to change your behaviors, you ultimately do, but the key thing we're saying is you can't do it in a sustainable way if you don't know what's going on inside of you. And then eventually you begin to actually test those behaviors. So I ask myself to reduce what it is that I'm eating, and it isn't for the purpose of losing the weight. The purpose is to help me understand the accuracy of my big assumption that I'll feel deprived. So if I do eat less, do I feel deprived? That's really the most important thing for me to be paying attention to that. And if I do feel deprived, well, then I now have just gotten some data that says my big assumption is correct. If I don't feel deprived, well, now I can begin to see, oh, well, maybe it isn't so correct. When we test our big assumptions, it's an iterative process, so that no one test. We don't want anybody to overgeneralize the results of any one test. Say 3, 4 tests over the course of several months, you begin to have a real database sense of an understanding of how accurate your big assumption is, and that's what fundamentally allows you to begin to alter your big assumption.
Well, and that's where the coach can come into the process as the support.
Absolutely.
Because you've got the pattern laid out, you've got the structure, and you're setting different kinds of goals within that.
That's right. That's right. And the coach's role there is very important in terms of helping the client to not immediately go to the, I haven't lost weight, or yes, I'm losing weight. And instead to direct the client to, okay, so what did you learn about the accuracy of your big assumption when you did that? And to help them stay in that meaning-making space, not goal accomplishment space. Because that going slow in the understanding really your mindset is going to be the thing that ultimately helps you to go far.
And that's why we know that it's hard work.
Right.
Because you have to stay with it.
Yes. Yeah.
They're wonderful examples, and I think that coaches can hear from that how they would apply it to business. I had the impulse to ask for a business example, but I don't think really it's necessary. Mm-hmm. Where do you think this work is going? What's the next frontier?
Yeah. So right now, the next frontier we're exploring is around working organizationally to create the culture in which this sort of work, where people are working on their mindset, becomes more of the default culture. And if leaders can get behind this notion that for all of us, including themselves, that for us to be able to meet what are fundamentally the bigger adaptive challenges in the world, so not just about our own individual adaptive challenges in growing, but in order for us to meet these bigger 21st century adaptive challenges, we all need to be genuine learners. It turns out that in most organizations, adult learning is a very, very challenging thing to create the conditions for, because there's a lot of covering up of being a learner. Covering up, I don't exactly know. And if leaders can help create the norm that says we are all active learners, myself included, the immunity to change process is a very clear way we can all be doing this learning work together, where there's a shared language around what is it we're trying to go for, and a shared kind of vulnerability of just being with one another in ways where we are saying we're actively trying to understand another way we can be doing the work individually and doing the work together. So that's where
it's
we're
again
heading.
applying the model to the organization, because you have to, that block is the idea that in one example would be, I can't let anybody see that I don't know everything I need to know.
Absolutely.
So to become the learner gets the organization through the block.
Yes, yes. So when you were asking, like, for a business example earlier, it is not uncommon for leaders to have big assumptions that go like, a leader ought to have all the answers. So imagine if that is the mental model of a leader. It's very hard then for that person to be showing up as a learner, because they feel like that threatens their credibility to other people. So if we can help leaders themselves see that they are basically creating the norms around what's acceptable, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds around this kind of deep learning, then we think we can help them create what we're calling deliberately developmental organizations.